I would visualize this feeling of being like trapped in a room, and it literally did feel like a demon or something was like always like with me. Like it had me like shackled
Oh my gosh.
onto him.
And
he would like keep me in a cage, like at my lowest lows, like I was in a cage, and I would look up and try to get out. Like, I don't know why I always had this like visualization. I would draw it all the time.
Oh my gosh.
Because that's why I always just felt like I was just like stuck in this cage and like I could never get out.
Hi family, my name is Amber Mlouhi and welcome back to another episode of In Harmony, giving you light and encouragement to pursue the incredible life that God has for you, the one watching this video. So today is a very exciting episode. I know you guys are like, Lauren, you always say it's exciting. You just trying to hype us up. It's a lie. This is a very exciting episode because we're interviewing our first female guest for this episode. And I actually know this female pretty well. If we look similar, that's because we are sisters. We share similar DNA. So today I'm going to introduce you to Amber Mlouhi. She is my sister, as I mentioned, and she's also the owner of Amber Mlouhi Interior Designs. And she's the interior designer for our family's home building company. So she's a woman with many talents, many gifts. But today we're not talking about countertops or backsplashes. Today we're talking about something a little bit more deeper and personal. We're talking about her personal faith journey, becoming a Christian, and her walk with God. So Amber, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. So as I mentioned, that's the intention with this show is you have a very interesting faith walk. And maybe it's because I kind of saw it from the ground up, seeing you walk through it, different highs and lows, wrestling with different things with your faith. So the intention is to just help one person out there who might be going through something similar to what you went through. So if you don't mind us starting there, can you tell us a little bit more about your story and how your faith journey started?
Yeah, so growing up, I don't know if you touched on it in previous episodes of like how we were raised, but we grew up in a split religion household. So my dad is Muslim and my mom is, she grew up Catholic. Mm-hmm. Now she is a more practicing Christian. Mm-hmm. But, their agreement was to teach us their own prospective religions. And then once we were of age to make our own decision, we would choose which one we wanted to follow. And I think we definitely predominantly learned more about Christianity than we did about Islam. But I think, too, being raised in America, you have more of an influence because it is the predominant religion. But I think in order to keep the peace between the household, because that was their initial agreement.
Right,
when they were,
on paper, it sounded good.
Yeah, on paper, I feel like when they were talking about it before they had kids, it sounded like a good idea in theory, but it definitely was a lot more messier than that. So I think in order to eventually keep the peace in the household, religion just wasn't really talked about after a while. I think we kind of did what we did to get our check marks in the Catholic book of
communion.
Yeah, communion, catechism. We did it what we needed to do to get my grandma to lay off of my mom a little bit.
Yes.
But then after that, there wasn't much persistence to go back into church or to make it a part of our lifestyle. Right. I think we did believe in God, but as a family, but it didn't really go much deeper than that because, like the one of the biggest differences between Islam and Christianity is the difference between if Jesus considered the Son of God.
Right.
So, Jesus just wasn't really used in the household. So once I became, a little bit older, I think as a lot of college kids do, you start to get a little skeptical and start asking questions, and these questions are, we think they're very profound, but they just start questions that, just cannot be answered really by anybody, and even people who've studied Christianity for decades. Yeah. So I think naturally I started doubting a lot of things. Okay. And I found myself when I was in college, I think leaning a lot more towards atheism. Wow. And just being agnostic. I actually remember, I was thinking about this the other day. We have a friend that we grew up with, and she was actually part of the atheist club at UTEP. I
did not know there was an atheist club at UTEP.
Yeah, there's an atheist club, or at least there was back in the day when I went. And I had considered joining it because I really was, it really made a lot more sense to me that there wasn't a God than that there was a God. Okay. Just because of a lot of, questions that I had. Like I said, I think one of my biggest ones, for example, was the concept of heaven and hell. And if God is so all-knowing, then how can he, is it already predetermined that we're sentenced to hell or sentenced to heaven? So thereby free will isn't really even a thing. Right. So, and of course, that's such a complex question. And again, me thinking I'm like some profound 20-year-old that's no one's ever asked this question before out of, the many years billions that people have, billions of people that have walked the face of the earth, and much smarter than I am. So just questions like that, people couldn't answer to me. I think a lot of it too was the fact that it wasn't even being answered. Okay. A lot of these questions I had were just completely disregarded, and it was one of those things that you shouldn't be asking those questions, move on. Mm-hmm. And to me, that sounded like a diversion, and that it needed to be questioned even further, because to me, it sounds like you're being cornered because you don't know the answer to my questions. Right. And it's threatening your ideology on life. Yeah. So I actually didn't end up joining that atheist club, but I at that point, I definitely, was as far away from faith as possible. And I think it definitely, showed in my behavior too. Really? I was, I extremely as secular gets. I was definitely of the world and didn't really think much of like my salvation or anything like that. Okay. As time went on, I started questioning whether I should force myself to go back into church. So by that point, I had moved to...
You said force yourself to go back to church?
Yeah, and I think it was just the fact that, I've battled a ton of, severe mental health issues a majority of my life. But that's a whole other podcast. But something that I noticed was, people found a lot of comfort and I guess happiness or
peace.
Overall like a peaceful way of looking at their life and their misfortunes. So if they were going to church. And so I figured, okay, well, there must be something here. Maybe if I force myself to
try it out,
to start, believing in things, and maybe I can find somebody to change my mind about these really conflicting issues that I have. And so I would go to church and find that I was not really meeting people to answer my questions still. Occasionally would come across the very condemning self-righteous Christian who it wasn't really always pointed at me directly, but I guess the way that they would talk about other people who maybe live different lives than them just really gave me a sick feeling and made me think that, oh, well, there's a lot of contradictions here because, Christians are always talking about how God is very loving and Jesus is that Christians shouldn't judge. And that's all I'm feeling when I go into church is just, all this judgment. So I always kind of had, issues with people like that, especially even in high school as well. I remember there was this group of kids that went to this one specific church, and for lack of a better word, they were just straight up bullies to everybody. I do remember this one comment that this girl made to me, saying that I would go to hell because I was only baptized on my forehead. Wow. So only my forehead would make it to heaven and the rest of me would go to hell.
And she said that with like a straight face?
Oh, yeah, no, she was very serious. And she was like actually kind of concerned for me. And to me, I mean, it made absolutely no sense. But I think too, like the fact that she was so like outward with it and didn't really care to know anything else about like my walk of faith or try to get me to, try to convince me any other way was just very off-putting. And again, it was also the character of these people that made me very off-putted. I'm like, if this is like the true representation of what it is to be a true Christian, because she walked the walk. Like she, was all very adamant about waiting till marriage. And she was always talking about church, like, truly. And now I see her, I'm friends with her on Facebook still. And I could tell like she's, stayed on her straight and narrow. She's never deviated. But yeah, just instances of people like that, I think really steered me away from church. And so this was just like an ongoing on and off battle.
You felt like that moment, like that experience you had with that group of people, it really impacted your faith?
Yeah, it did. And honestly, not even just me, my best friend, we still talk about it to this day because we know we both grew up with these people, and we were both like, no, like these people were terrible. And
so there's people who can push you away from
God,
exactly,
and people
who can push you towards God, and they like completely off-railed. Like, wow.
Yeah, and again, I don't want to. I'm sure this. I mean, this was high school, and people change. I haven't talked to these people since high school, so not to say that they're terrible people to their core, but I guess in that moment they did make me feel terrible. I guess any time I thought of a Christian or what a good Christian is supposed to be, I would immediately think of her.
Okay.
And so I think that was one of the big things too that kind of made me stray from church. So it really wasn't until very recently, I think when you started solidifying your walk with Jesus, that I started considering it, going into it like fully. I think you really motivated Matt to go, which is my boyfriend, and then he kind of brought me along, but I tend to be pretty extreme with things. And so I'm definitely like, as soon as I started, I went like full in.
Full in Jesus, man.
full in. Yeah. On fire for Jesus now. So it's a complete switch because I never thought I would be here. Definitely consider myself still a baby Christian. I am still learning a lot. I try to, fully absorb myself in as much information as I possibly can. But to be honest with you, it's still a challenge. I still have, I still battle with like my doubts every now and then.
Can you unpack that a little bit more for us?
Yeah, sure. I mean, again, it goes back to just like certain concepts that, maybe make me feel a little uneasy just because I don't completely understand them. I think there's people who think in different ways.
Okay.
I think I've always tend to be a little bit more, I don't know if it's necessarily logic based, but I think things need to really make sense to me in order for me to
make a decision,
strong opinions about something. Okay. And I typically don't form strong opinions until I feel like I'm really well versed on everything there is to know about, this specific topic, but that's how I am in everything. So I think the hard thing about religion, and this is something I also realized about atheism, is that there's always going to be questions that don't have answers.
Right.
And that's when you need to rely on faith. And it's funny because people just assume faith is with religion, but it's with any existential reasoning.
Relationship too.
Yeah, and relationships, anything. And you're never going to know absolutely everything about anything.
You'll go crazy.
Yeah, and something that too that I kind of thought about too is even how flawed, science can be.
Yeah.
When you think about, like, I always think about like those studies that always talk about the ideal diet, and one study will show that veganism is the ideal diet. One study will show that carnivore is the ideal diet. And that's like extremely like
different diets.
Wow, like one is all meat and one is absolutely no meat. But people swear by it, and there's tons and tons of studies about both.
That support both.
Support both. And if you're going to completely rely on studies, I mean, you want to talk about Christianity being contradicting, like that's a big, that's a huge contradiction right there. Wow. So I think that's what I am currently like training myself to do, is be more into, faith and going based off of like feeling than it is purely logic. Because if you go off of logic for all of your beliefs, you're always going to be disappointed, because humans are incredibly flawed. So our studies, our findings, everything that is of human is flawed in some regard. So you're never going to find that perfection.
So I find it really interesting that a lot of people who go to church or who don't go to church, they have some sort of religious influence in their house, and then they kind of will grow on that. So they're like, yeah, I wasn't really like, that Christian, but now I'm like very Christian. I love the church. But I think it's very interesting with you. Obviously, you came from two different religions in your household, but you were, at least like as your sister, you were like legit atheist, like essentially agnostic. Was there a point, or was there something that flipped the switch in you? Because it's like now I see you completely different in the best way. You still have those beautiful and amazing like characteristics that you had when you were young, but now it's just like, and I wish I could like put into words, you just look like a completely different person. Like you look like just more at peace, happier, lighter. Was there a point in your faith journey when you went from basically almost joining the atheist club at school? Was it like, oh, and then I read this, or I saw this? Or was it more so slowly that you felt like God was making his way into your heart? Can you unpack that a little bit for us about that 180 turn?
Yeah, so I guess when people have like a coming to Jesus moment, thinking back, I feel like I kind of did, but I brushed it off. Ooh. I do remember I had this really weird moment. I know, and I think because I tried so hard to like convince myself that I was just going absolutely crazy. It was when I was still living in LA, and it was during the pandemic. I was going through a lot of like personal, like family stuff, and so like I knew I was already like going through it. But I did have this like very just like, I don't even know how to explain it to make it not sound completely insane, but it did feel like something like came inside of me and was talking to me like very loudly. It wasn't just like, the voices in my head, because I was very familiar with how those sounded. This was completely different, and it shook me. I was uncontrollably crying because it just felt like a light was inside of me, like talking to me. And it lasted for a couple hours. And
where was this? In your car?
This was in my room. I was just
watching TV.
No, I wasn't even watching TV. I was just kind of like staring up at the ceiling. Like I don't know what I was doing. And I wasn't trying to call anything to me, or it was just kind of like, just a random moment. I don't think anything might have triggered it, but again, I just always kind of brushed it off and didn't really think that was God. I guess at that time I really wasn't religious. I was, I think, leaning a little bit more just towards like the concept of there being a higher power in the universe, but not necessarily calling it God. My roommate at the time was really into horoscopes and tarot cards and all that stuff. And she's the only person I told. And so she was trying to like call it all these different types of things, but I that didn't make sense to me either. Wow. So I just kind of brushed it off. And I'm like, I was probably just losing my mind. It was COVID, so that checks out. But besides that, I think it was just going to church. You know, I know that you were always inviting us with you, and I do remember this one sermon that I think it was Jared was talking about, or Shannon, but it was about this one verse talking about when Jesus was fasting. Mm-hmm. And it had been 40, I think like 40 days, how many 40 days like that, yeah. And he was, I think, climbing a mountain or something, and he was exhausted, and he heard the voice of Satan come to him, and he quoted scripture to him and was telling, pretty much using ammo that he know,
like manipulating scripture,
of course, like perverting it to make him feel
like bow down to him
or question God's authority. And there was actually a moment where Jesus was, you know, thrown off a little bit by Satan's words, and he had to like shake it off and eventually like, you know, rebuke the voice. But what that verse taught me was that the enemy will always do whatever it takes to get you to not listen to the light inside of you and the voice of God. He knows the exact way, and he carefully curates, like custom curates his voice and his attack to what he knows
when you're vulnerable.
When he knows that you're at your most vulnerable, but also he knows exactly what's going to pull you from God. And I think that really struck a chord in me, because I'm like, well, that's exactly it. Like, yeah. I've clinged to these reasons, like bad people from the church, and these questions that can't be answered. I've used that as reasons why I should stray from my faith, but that still doesn't feel enough, and it doesn't feel like that is the true right answer. Mm-hmm. And so I think when I told myself that, it kind of like allowed God to really start talking to me. And anytime I had, you know, these doubts, I would get serious with myself and ask myself, okay, is this the enemy talking, or is this God talking to me? So I think that was like the transformation. And like I said, I battled through a ton of, you know, issues with my mental health, and at points I would find it therapeutic to draw a lot. Mm-hmm. And I know like all my artwork was like extremely depressing, but I remember like, I would visualize this feeling of being like trapped in a room, and it literally did feel like a demon or something was like always like with me. Like it had me like shackled.
Oh my gosh.
Onto him.
And
he would like keep me in a cage. Like at my lowest lows, like I was in a cage, and I would look up and try to get out. Like, I don't know why I always had this like visualization. I would draw it all the time.
Oh my gosh.
Because that's why I always just felt like I was just like stuck in this cage, and like I could never get out. But yeah, and I know that verse doesn't really make like a ton of sense, but the way I say it, but I think for me, it started connecting all the dots. Like, wow, like all of these questions, all of these these battles I've gone through, like mentally, it was never, I don't think that was ever really me. And I know there's like talk about like learning to differentiate between you and the enemy.
Mm-hmm.
But I do feel like at my lowest lows, or like the things that have kept me stuck, were mostly from the enemy.
Like demonic.
And demonic. Yeah.
So, and it makes perfect sense what you're saying. And I hope the audience, like, it makes sense to them too. It sounds like what you were saying is that maybe the reason that scripture spoke to you was because I'm sure a lot of us can agree who have a love for God or have faith in God, that there's a lot of people who say, oh, but this doesn't make sense. And there's almost like this ideology that if you're logical and you're very like fact-based, you can't be Christian because there's so many things that don't make sense. But really the truth is that God gave you that mind. He knows you're logical. He's not afraid of your questions. He's not afraid of your doubts. But a lot of times the enemy knows, he uses you. It sounds like he can use your logical mind against you.
Exactly.
And even though God gave it to you, and really a logical mind that questions is a gift and it's a good thing, you know, that's not something you should be ashamed of, and it's definitely not something God's scared of. He can use it against you to be like, you see, how can there be a God if you're so logical of this?
Exactly.
If you don't mind sharing, you mentioned that there was a time where you were in your room a random day or night, just looking at your ceiling, and you felt this overwhelming voice. Would you mind sharing, maybe not so much exactly what it says, because I'm sure that's super personal, but kind of maybe like to give us an idea about what the words were from that voice and the feeling that it made you have, that really shook you to be like, that was different. Like that shook me up.
Yeah, I mean, it was a feeling like I'll never forget, because in my mind while it was happening, I'm like, I better not forget this. I better not forget this. I better not forget this feeling.
Oh my God.
It really did just feel like a light that was completely, again, separate of myself, because again, I was very familiar with the way I talked to myself. I was very familiar with like the demons in my head. Like it was like I had been hearing those voices since I was 7, very familiar with how they sound.
Very clear. It was something different.
But it was just something completely different, and it actually kind of gave me like an out of body experience, for lack of a better word. And again, I know if you're someone who is like, you know, I can
you know how crazy
understand
it sounds.
how crazy that sounds, because if I was hearing myself talk, I'd be like,
sure,
this girl was probably hallucinating. But I'm just saying how it went down. But
it obviously shook you up.
Yeah, like it literally felt like an out of body experience. It didn't feel like I was in my room. It felt like I was having this conversation with this existential force, and it was a force that was so much higher than me, and it was just trying to like, felt like maybe it was always trying to reach me and always trying to talk to me, but this was the first time it was like actually able to. And it was comforting, but it was also like a little terrifying. I think just because of the fact that it was like so like strong and impactful. But again, like the stuff that it was telling me were actually things I didn't really know a lot about and that I should do. But it definitely shook me, and I couldn't stop crying. And it wasn't out of fear. It was just like, I don't know how to react to this feeling. But again, I never considered that like my coming to Jesus moment, because I wasn't religious at the time. But thinking back and hearing other people's testimonies of having come to Jesus moments, it sounded very similar to that conversation I had with God. So it kind of sucks that wasn't my transformation.
Well, maybe it obviously had an impact.
Yeah, and again, I think that it also, looking back, when I was debating about just going all into my journey, it helped remind me of that feeling I had, that like extreme feeling that I could not comprehend.
Wow.
Yeah.
So as we're closing up, you've known what it's like to be maybe a confused Catholic. You know what it's like to be an atheist, essentially, and you know what it's like to be a Christian. What impact would you say being a Christian has had on your life in total?
I think I was talking about it the other day to my I'm laughing because every time, like lately, that's all I've been wanting to talk about.
Jesus.
Jesus.
She's like, I'm going to go ride with Alia because she talks about Jesus with me. I said,
no one wants to entertain me because I just think I'm like on to something new and crazy per usual. But I was talking to them about it the other day about just how much more at peace I feel now.
Okay.
Than ever before. I don't feel as anxious about the future, I think, as much, even just like death or anything. I really do feel like God has it under control and that he knows what's best. And even if there's a hurdle that comes my way, I do feel that it's come to me for a reason and I shouldn't question it. And I just need to overcome it or
do your best.
Do my best to approach it in the way that he sees best fit. And I think that's helped give me that much peace. And also I was talking about it with Matt yesterday about how I feel even my approach to what I want out of life is very different now. I feel I want to have more of like an impact on others than before. You know, I think everything was I was very self-motivated. Like, you know, most people are, you know, you just want to be successful. You just want to make a lot of money and you just want to be like that boss girl. Mm-hmm. But I don't feel like it's shifted. Like any of that stuff is important to me now, but as far as what that is, I'm not sure yet of how I can help, you know, be the salt of the earth. But I do feel like a really strong calling to that now and to kind of almost abandon my previous plans of, you know, just trying to, you know, be as like self-fulfilling as possible.
Wow. So peace, not so much fear with death, and maybe more clarity on what your purpose is in life. Maybe not exactly how you're going to fulfill that. Maybe you're still figuring it out, but those things you would say are some of the biggest things that you've gotten.
Yeah, just wanting to, you know, help other people as much as possible.
So in closing, what would you say to somebody who might be in a place where they're battling depression, they're battling anxiety, and they feel down? And I've lost my way. I keep holding on for a better day. I'm leaning on you when the world's astray. I left my heart open so you hear my prayer. Because they went to a church or community where they weren't accepted, or they were judged, or someone who feels like they're in that cage with that demon being pulled down and every day is a struggle. What's something that you would tell that person?
I was actually listening to a podcast coming over here and about church hurt, and I heard this one pastor from, actually used to be my old pastor at my old church in LA, said that he believes that anybody who speaks ill of other Christians or other people in general for I guess not following,
being exactly like them even.
Yeah, that's not of God. You know, belittling other people, speaking like you're above them, being judgmental that's not of God. And we have to realize that if you have that church hurt, if somebody has said something that's made you stray from your faith, that realize that, you know, those people don't speak for God, and that God is all loving and he's all forgiving, and there's nothing that you have done in your past or will do that he will hate you for. And that he is, you know, all accepting. loving, and again, just go in with an open mind. I was watching A Case for Christ, and just pretty much it's a movie about an atheist who eventually
Comes to Christ.
comes to Christ. And I think I noticed a lot of consistencies with him in the beginning was that he was very closed-minded, and people were answering his questions, but I think he wasn't in a point where he wanted to accept them. And I think if you are somebody who's very skeptical about religion and faith, I understand. I promise you, any questions that you have, you're not the first person to ever ask them. But understand that I think you're never going to get those questions answered. And really the only way to know if something is right for you is to try it out and see how it makes you feel. Because I think that was the biggest thing for me is like, I feel completely transformed because I've decided to go against my skepticism and walk this walk with God.
Wow. That was so good.
Yeah.
That was so good.
Also, if you, a really good book, Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, who actually used to be an atheist as well, and then eventually, made one of the most profound books highlighting all the good parts, or just highlighting like what it is to be Christian. I think he does a really good job about breaking down a lot of the main questions that people ask, and tries to approach it in a very like logical way to help you connect the dots. Somebody. Yeah, really good book. I'm not completely finished with it, but so far
it's real good.
It's really good.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Amber. What could we as a family, what can we as an audience do to support you?
Pray for me. I honestly just do something that's going to help someone, whether if it's somebody that you know personally or a stranger you see on the street. I think that's how we're going to spread the good word of God and Christ is to do good and be a light and really just be like just be nice. Be really nice to people and helpful in any way that you possibly can.
Thank you so much, Amber. That was beautifully said. Thank you all so much for watching. We hope you enjoyed this video today. Amber was getting very personal. So if there's somebody in your life who you think is struggling with their faith or you think may get something out of this, make sure to share it with them. Comment below. Let us know what you thought of this episode and if you would like more guests like Amber for future episodes. And don't forget to subscribe for upcoming episodes of In Harmony. Thank you so much for watching, Amber. Thank you so much for joining us. And we'll see you all next time.